Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie and I'm here today with George Ryan and Stuart Moran, who are both consultants with us at URM. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider Talk Cyber. So today we're going to be talking about cyber security expectations and regulatory requirements for NHS suppliers and sort of organisations in the medical device supply chain more broadly. So my first question for you guys to start things off is there's been an open letter recently issued by the NHS to its suppliers, which it highlights sort of a tighter scrutiny of suppliers and more direct engagement. What does this shift indicate about how the NHS expects suppliers to contribute to protecting patient care and operational resilience?
Yeah, so I think to give a bit of background on that, so it's May 2025, kind of last year, is where we had the NHS brought out the Cybersecurity Supply Chain Charter. So that essentially established what they expect to be good practice. And in November, we started to see organisations kind of sign up. As we'll kind of cover later, that includes extra things. In addition to the DSPT, which is the Data Security Protection Toolkit, and that kind of includes the continuous monitoring, MFA, etc. Essentially, what we've now had with the letter is NHS are kind of realizing that the supply chain's ever increasing. You know, if we look at kind of any company, the chances are you're using a supplier. Therefore, we're coming into the NHS. There's more kind of exposure. I'm sure if anyone looks at the news recently, we'll see there's quite a few attacks that have happened within the healthcare industry. I think as a result of that, the government have kind of thought, we need to kind of amp it up a bit. In terms of, when we're going to the more direct stuff, this may be that the NHS, where they feel they may need a bit more assurance or there may be indicators, can actually reach out now to their suppliers and just request a bit more evidence. Obviously, when we're looking at the wider scale of things, this comes as we're having the Cybersecurity and Network Operational Resilience Bill coming through. And in general, I think we can see the government are really tightening the security around suppliers. So I think if anything, the shift kind of indicates there's going to be more scrutiny on the supply chain. And as a result, if you are supplying into the NHS, you're going to need to be a bit more aware of your cybersecurity, not just how you do it, but how you actually document it, evidence it, and can explain it, at any point during the year. Because for instance, with this, you may not be questioned on your self-assessment for the DSPT every year. It may just be a random month that they go, actually, we need a bit more from you. You've got to be prepped and in that position that you can answer that without kind of having to scramble as such.
So suppliers are now expected to implement measures like MFA, continuous monitoring, and immutable backups. Which of these requirements do you think are going to be the most challenging for suppliers to embed, and why?
Yeah, so I think ultimately, I guess anything with comes to securing your cybersecurity is it depends. It's going to depend a lot on what you have in-house in terms of your technical capabilities. So, for example, with your MFA, as we've seen, sure, I'm sure you've seen that as well. Some suppliers, it can really be a struggle because the technical knowledge to implement it isn't there. They've not typically done it before. However, once MFA is kind of set up, you can almost leave it as a background thing. The MFA is set up. If you set up so they have to have MFA, you can kind of leave it. It's there. It's done as such. When it comes to the immutable backups, again, it's just having that knowledge. So if companies are using stuff like Azure, AWS, it's an available option to use. But again, it's knowing, is it there? Being able to use it. The importance of that one in particular, if we look at the recent Striker events, an immutable backup essentially means that no one can actually change our backup. Therefore, if we get hit by ransomware, we have a known, safe, secure backup that we can actually get up and spinning, run up from there. What can make that one a bit harder than the MFA, for example, is just because you're doing immutable backups doesn't mean that, you're done, it's configured, it's out of the way. You would still need to be kind of checking that your backups are working correctly. I think I'm sure you'll agree. The last thing you want to do is check your backup when you actually need it. I'm sure if anyone's done that, even with their own emails, as soon as you need something, you need to find an email, you can't find it. So again, it's that checking. When we get to the kind of continuous monitoring, I think that one's quite an interesting one because, again, similar to the backups, a lot of software you use will have the availability for that, the options for that. One challenge could be the technical of knowing the options there. Then you've got the challenge of actually knowing how to turn it on, how to check it, how to configure. But again, when we come to continuous monitoring, one of the challenges that we do see is it's a shift from this kind of one-off mentality to a constant thing. So again, it's in the name, it's continuous monitoring. You don't check it once a year for what's happened. It's having it done and set up in a way that your organization, your data is always going to be looked at, checked. Things are going to flag up if there is an error, if there is an issue, potentially an indicator of compromise. And again, off the back of that, it's worth noting that for some organizations where resources allow and you may not have the people in-house, you can look to using your supply chain for this. So you might use a SOC, a Security Operations Center, and get them to do some of the monitoring for you and alert you, which may take some of the labor off of you. And, in some cases, if you feel they're better technically, it may help you. But yeah, to answer in short, they're all challenging for different reasons. It could be the technical aspect, the workflow aspect, just seeing it not as a snapshot, but something that you do have to do all the time. Ultimately, it's what your organization has in-house, what you know, what you don't know, and then going from there, really.
Great, thank you, George. The Data Security and Protection Toolkit, or the DSPT, remains central to demonstrating data security maturity. Where do you see the biggest gaps in understanding or readiness among suppliers working through the DSPT requirements today?
Yeah, so I think one thing is, and we can often get caught up with any kind of standard or certification, is where it may be checked on an annual basis, is what we usually do is we'll have a spike in governance around that. And then for the rest of the year, it kind of drops off. We fall a bit short of things. So with the DSPT, for example, if we think of our asset register, one gap in terms of readiness is thinking that you have your asset register and the next time you check it is the next time you've got your DSPT. But, effectively, you could be going 11 months without actually updating it and therefore producing something which is incomplete. Similar, we're having more scrutiny on the supply chain. Chances are you're going to have suppliers, as is in part of the DSPT, is actually understanding with your suppliers who is responsible for what, who needs to do what, and how you're checking at your supply chain is actually secure enough that you would you want to use them. I think the NHS does have recommendations for what certifications you should look from suppliers. But again, it's these little things, and again, constantly updating your supply chain. If you have someone in your supply chain gets hit, are you going to be aware of that? Are you going to know? Are you potentially going to see indicators of compromise that you need to look out for yourself? I think ultimately, when we do look at the biggest gap, it is seeing the process as something that needs to be constantly done. It's the constant governance. It's not a pick it up, govern it, get your assessment or audit, etc. done, and that's it. It's continuously making sure that you are doing things as expected. You are keeping up with what is expected of you within the standard, and the outside of that, such as the checking your backups, etc. That can be really beneficial. And again, kind of another gap that it leads to is you can see all these requirements, but it can be quite difficult for some organizations to actually map out in terms of workflow how to address that in a kind of business efficient manner. So if you're just going through it one by one, maybe not the best approach. Whereas actually, if you think this links to this, we can have a process here to do this. It's a lot easier to govern, to keep up to date, and as you continue to supply, it'll get easier each year to check things. If you have a live asset register, a little bit easier.
I think George has hit all the main points there. But a couple of the issues raised include a lot of organizations have other certifications, such as CE plus, ISO 27001 security standards, and believe that DSPT is sorted if they do them. It does offer you mitigation of not needing to answer certain questions or certain requirements because they're covered by other things, but you still need to be able to complete the whole of the DSPT, certainly the mandatory questions. Interesting point is that years ago, you used to be able to get standards exceeded by answering the questions well and providing large lumps of evidence. You now cannot get standards exceeded without CE+. You've got to be having a pen test. Otherwise, you can only, and a lot of companies aim not to be standards met, to be standards exceeded. So that's one important thing that organizations don't understand. Another one is that we see with a number of clients is the categorization of categories 1, 2, and 3. They don't understand where they fit, and sometimes they're given a categorization above where they need to be, and they can challenge this because as you go up the categories, or 1 being the highest, is that you get more oversight, more cost, more requirements to be audited, for instance. So going back to the DSPT admin people and challenging your categorization if you don't believe it's right, just because you provide an IT solution to the NHS doesn't necessarily make you an IT supplier, a supplier of IT services. There's a volume issue there and the type of service you provide. So organizations really need to make sure they're in the right category. Otherwise, they're loading themselves with extra work.
So sort of moving away from the NHS specifically and looking at the medical device landscape a bit more broadly now. We've got a blog on ISO 13485 and the wider medical device regulatory landscape, which highlights the need to keep pace with harmonised standards and evolving state-of-the-art expectations. How do you think these shifting standards, particularly around software and AI, will influence how suppliers design and maintain their products?
In terms of 13485, which is the standard for all medical devices, and a lot of medical devices now are either contain software that connects to the internet or connects to some sort of data repository, which is software in a medical device, or it's software as a medical device, which is standalone software such as electronic health record systems, order comm systems, and they are largely based in cloud-based systems now, whether they be public or private clouds. If they're on-premise devices, service engineers are accessing them and seeing the patient data, which of course requires protection of those services and those repositories. In terms of the harmonized elements, IEC 62304, which is the standard for writing software as a medical device or in a medical device, is being reissued. We're expecting it to come in August as issue 2 this year, which is, I understand, contains guidance and requirements around AI. So it's definitely being built in, and my guess is that is part of the problem of it being delayed. It was supposed to be reissued 2 years ago, and it's been massively delayed. So the AI piece, I think, is coming in more and more, as is the security requirements. Within the software world, security has always been a non-functional requirement, but it's more and more becoming part of the function of the product itself. So it's definitely a more relevant thing. So IEC 62304 is a harmonized standard, which means within the EU, it's been accepted as if you're writing software as a medical device under ISO 13485, which defines your quality system, you've got to do it. You have no choice. You have to do that or be more equivalent. You have to be better than it and evidence that, which is almost impossible without doing it. The other point is state-of-the-art standards. what we're seeing is less standards being harmonized because it's a cost to the governments, the regulatory authorities. So what the regulations say, certainly in the European MDR and the UK MD, is that you must take note of state of the art in designing your medical device. And one such standard relevant to this conversation is, get this one right, ISO 81001-5-1, which is the health software and health IT systems safety, effectiveness, and security. And it is about the security of medical devices. And that's state of the art. It's relatively new, well, a couple of years ago, but its profile has raised over the last couple of years to make people take more awareness of it. And we're certainly raising it with a number of our clients who are software companies to make sure that they're looking at those requirements as they use 62304 within their 13485 quality management system to make sure it all fits together and security is addressed, and AI as part of that security.
Absolutely. So looking at the US now, given that the FDA has had the power since 2022 to deny market access to medical devices with insufficient cybersecurity, how might such regulatory pressure affect UK suppliers operating internationally? And does it hint at a broader global trend towards stricter cyber controls?
Yeah, so the original 2022 instrument in the US, which allowed the FDA to deny pre-market submission, which basically means they can't access the market without going through the FDA. And the FDA started then looking at cybersecurity as a no-go issue. And actually on the 3rd of February this year, they issued the final notice on this, which certainly reinforces their authority and what needs to be done within that space. And we're still looking at that in detail to see what the requirements are going to be for the FDA and the US market. But they are a gatekeeper to that market. So if you have any security issues around it, if you're not a syringe body as a medical device, but you've got a bit of software in it, then you're going to have to go through that pre-market submission to get into the American market. Similarly, this year, the FDA have aligned their quality process with the ISO 13485. So you can see that the global market, to your point, Annie, about what's needed, is coalescing. It's becoming more one approach in how you address quality and security of medical devices and how it connects to the internet and the data it protects. Interestingly, the Americans in their judicial systems already have an article called High Trust, which is the Health Information Trust Alliance. And that provides a framework that brings together other American security standards in the medical world, such as HIPAA, NIST, and ISO standards. So that's another one to watch out for when you're working into America. And High Trust is getting more profile, but it's also relevant actually to the now being used in things like finance and defense. So as a gatekeeper. So I think globally, more organizations are starting to ask us, what about the security of our product? AI is a huge thing with the regulatory bodies. Nearly every medical product that we look at now has either a bolt-on or an embedded AI associated with it. So, it's definitely a rising trend, and people are confused about how the security works around the AI to protect the personal information and the people it's making decisions or supporting decisions on. So, yeah, definitely security is becoming the flavour of the month in medical device world.
Perfect. Thank you so much, both of you, for your time today. If any of our listeners also want to read up on what we've discussed today, we've got a couple of blogs on our website, urmconsulting.com. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that NHS letter that we were talking about at the start, the blog on that one is called NHS Cybersecurity Open Letter. What does it mean for suppliers? And to look at the ISO 13485 standard and other sort of regulatory changes in the medical device landscape. We've got a blog on our website called ISO 13485 and Beyond, Key Updates Shaping the Medical Device Regulatory Landscape. So thank you very much for listening today, and we will see you next time. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could spare a moment to leave a rating or review at ratethispodcast.com/InfoSec Insider. To listen to more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Podbean.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.